We are going to go ahead and begin recording. And on behalf of the Southeastern School Behavioral Health community, I would like to welcome everyone to a phenomenal webinar today on behavior and the IEP. We have with us Lisa McCliment and Dianne Bennett of our Office of Special Education Services here at the South Carolina Department of Education. Our webinar this month, as every other month, is sponsored by and facilitated by the Behavioral Alliance of South Carolina, which is a grant-funded program out of the Office of Special Education Services. So on behalf of the entire Southeastern School Behavioral Health community and the BASC team, we would like to welcome all of you. And without further ado, one more housekeeping piece here, and I'll hand it on over to Lisa and Dianne for the wow of the afternoon. For all questions, please type your questions in our chat box. We will have an interactive portion of the presentation today, so be mindful, pay attention, please be engaged. And Dianne and Lisa are both going to be facilitating the chat. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, welcome and thank you. If you have any questions, please put those in the comment box below, and I will be sure to populate our chat box so that Lisa and Dianne can attend to everyone. So thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much, Dianne. And I'll go ahead and turn it on over to y'all.
Thank you, Taylor. Thanks for having us. And now there's a little bit of pressure because there's really not a wow factor to behavior in the IEP. So, that's definitely a little bit of pressure, but we're really glad to be here and doing this.
Absolutely.
And when we heard there were 53 people, on this that were registered, we're like, right before the holidays, we thought we were going to get out of it. And maybe there'd just be a few people here, but we're glad everybody for showing up and participating. And let's find our next slide. And so for today, our agenda for today's presentation is going to include an overview of improving outcomes, behavior in the IEP, and IEP implementation. And I say overview because looking at behavior in the IEP for us has typically been an all-day training, and we're going to try to cover maybe just an overview or the most relevant information in 1 hour, which is new for us because we can tend to talk and talk and talk on this training. And so we're going to try to keep it to that hour. If you have any related questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them as we go along. And improving outcomes. Last month, our colleague, Dr. Shannon Jones, conducted a webinar on effective alternatives to exclusionary discipline. I don't know if anybody was able to watch that, but she introduced the webinar with a slogan and an embedded philosophy of keep them so we can teach them. And it's the first time Dianne and I had ever heard that phrase. And I thought that phrase really is so powerful. I would like to think that throughout our presentation, we will hopefully support that theme. An IEP, there we go. IEP should be developed to address student needs, to ensure access to and involvement in the general curriculum to the greatest extent possible. To improve outcomes for our students, we need to keep them engaged so that students will exit from our schools college and career ready. And for those of us in South Carolina where college and career ready is a term that is not new to us. We hear that all the time. Okay. In addressing social and emotional learning needs, we need to help ensure that students succeed in school and life, manage their feelings, build healthy relationships, navigate social environments, and develop the skills needed to prepare them for the world. And if you work in education in South Carolina, then you're familiar with the profile of the South Carolina graduate. I think, as we've gotten a chance to go into many districts around the state, we see this everywhere. When you walk in the front door and teacher classrooms, on bulletin boards. But during the 2017-18 school year, our Office of Personalized Learning engaged groups of diverse stakeholders from across the state to develop competencies for this profile of the South Carolina graduate. And through this work, they have defined the critical components of world-class knowledge, world-class skills, and life and career characteristics to ensure that all students graduate ready for college, career, and citizenship. This work is grounded in the belief that our profile of a graduate is not simply an aspiration for our state, it's our commitment to every child in South Carolina. The South Carolina competencies right now are a prototype that are being field tested this school year by our Office of Personalized Learning. And educators across the state are engaging with the prototype competencies to learn, explore, and provide us with critical feedback that will help inform future iterations of the competencies and continua. So we'd like to show you how these competency prototypes align with CASEL's 5 competencies. And if you're not familiar with CASEL, CASEL is the collaborative for academic, social and emotional learning, which has been around for about, I would say, 20 years, and they have established 5 broad and interrelated areas of competence. Many states and districts have adopted the CASEL model. These next few slides will show you the skills within each CASEL competency and how they are supported through the development and practice of competencies within that profile of the South Carolina graduate. So for this first slide, let me find it. There we go. For this first slide, you can see the CASEL competency of self-awareness, identifying emotions, accurate self-perception, recognizing strengths, self-confidence, and self-efficacy, and how they align to the competencies and skills within the profile of the South Carolina graduate, such as recognizing and managing emotions, setting goals, taking strategic action, advocating for myself, and initiating purposeful connections. For the CASEL competency of self-management, you can see the alignment to the profile of the South Carolina graduate competencies. Impulse control aligning to recognizing and managing emotions, stress management and goal setting aligning to setting goals, making a plan, managing challenging issues, and self-discipline as well as self-motivation aligning to skills such as practicing positivity and gratitude, building a shared sense of purpose and clarity, just to name a few. And as I think about the behavior kids that I've worked with throughout my career, these all, it's impulse control, can't manage stress, there's a lot of lack of motivation. And so it's nice to see that states and districts are embedding this into their gen ed curriculum and in their general education settings. Nice to see. And social awareness, that's perspective taking, empathy, appreciating diversity and respect for others, aligning to such skills as nurturing and sustaining relationships, participating in community, and examining enduring problems. And kind of as we walk through, on our website, you'll see the Office of looks at or calls this a crosswalk, crosswalk between CASEL and our state competency and aligned skills in our profile. And as I talk through some of these, sometimes you get that picture in your head of that student who really needed some of these skills. So I hope some of you are making some connections. Here we have relationship skills, communication, social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. Aligning to the profile of the South Carolina graduate competency and aligned skills, such as engaging in academic discussion with others, building a sense of purpose, as well as initiating purposeful connections. My computer's just taking its time changing slides. And finally, we have the last CASEL competency of responsible decision-making, aligning with South Carolina's competencies. So the 5 CASEL competencies can be taught and applied at various developmental levels from childhood to adulthood, just as the South Carolina competencies and aligned skills for the profile of the South Carolina graduate can be taught at all levels. Let's just keep these skills in mind as we move on to talk about developing social, emotional, and behavioral IEPs for college and career readiness. These skills may be skills that can be addressed for students with behavioral needs. And I'm going to try to see if I got this. And I just put into the chat box the link to CASEL and their website in case anybody's interested in learning more. They offer, they really drive a lot of social emotional research. They guide practice, they have resources, so they're an excellent website to check out. So we are starting to hear other states refer to IEPs as college and career ready IEPs. And that definitely feels appropriate as we want all of our special education students to be college and career ready when they exit our services. College and career IEPs address students' academic and functional needs, including transition. And there we go. Today, we want to walk through addressing behavior in the IEP. What does IDEA say about addressing behavior? On this slide, you can see the exact wording in the regulation. Challenging behavior is one of several conditions that IDEA 2004 identifies as critical to a child's education. IEP teams are directed to address behavior issues when a child's behavior interferes with his or her learning, or when the child's behavior interferes with the learning of others. Furthermore, in addressing behavioral needs in the IEP team is directed to consider, when appropriate, strategies, including positive behavior interventions and supports. There we go. In the South Carolina Enrich IEP, the first place you will address behavior is in the consideration of relevant special factors section of the IEP. The special factors section of the IEP was brought up to the front of the IEP purposefully. By including this section first in the IEP, the intent is that teams will be reminded of the factors that need to be considered throughout the IEP development process. If special factors such as behavior, communication, need for assistive technology, language, and/or vision are concerns, then it should be evident in subsequent sections of the IEP that the team has considered and addressed the concerns. In regards to behavior, which we're talking about today, the questions are, does the student exhibit behaviors that interfere with his or her ability to access the general curriculum or the ability of others to learn? If the answer to either of the questions is yes, then the IEP team will be asked to describe the interventions, supports, and other strategies that have been or will be used to address the behavior. If the behavior is a concern, the PLAAF section and other sections of the IEP should reflect how those concerns are being addressed.
All right, so the next section we're going to talk about is the present levels of academic performance, academic achievement, and functional performance, or the PLAAF. This section provides information related to the student's current levels of performance. In the South Carolina Enrich IEP system, which is utilized by the districts here in South Carolina for writing IEPs, the PLAAF is divided into these sections: academic and functional strengths narrative, academic and functional needs narrative, an impact of disability statement section, and a section for parent and student input. Following that, there's a findings section where baseline data would be included related to the behavior skills that would be addressed. Altogether, these sections make up the PLAAF. Oftentimes, the PLAAF is referred to as the foundation of the IEP. The PLAAF provides information regarding what academic and functional levels the student is at in a current snapshot of time. It outlines what the student can do and knows right now. PLAAF information should be objective and supported by data. PLAAF information identifies the areas of strengths and the areas of need or skill deficits, and should provide information on how the student's skills compare to those students his or her same age or grade. Don't overlook the importance of including strengths in the narrative. This is where that student shines. For some of our students with more significant disabilities, that strength section may be relative for that individual student, but this strength information provides a significant and relevant information that teachers and providers can utilize when working with the student. Areas of strength can assist in addressing needs. Remember, this is that feel-good section of the IEP. Several years back, I participated in a training session in which a parent asked this question: how would you have felt if when you went to college, you were told that you could only enroll in classes in which you had a need or deficit? Would that make you want to continue in college? I know for myself, I probably would never have graduated if I had been told that I could only take math classes, because that is not my area of strength. But for me, this really emphasized how important it is to recognize strengths for the students. Even though the majority of the IEP is written to address those needs and to improve skills, that strength section is very relevant and very important to that process. So when highlighting behavioral strengths in the PLAAF narrative, specific information should be included. Being a sweet girl or a cute kid really does not provide skill level information that reflects these characteristics. What skill or skills does that student exhibit that warrants a description such as this? Is the student organized? Does the student follow directions? Does the student get along well with others? Is the student polite to peers and adults? Does the student complete assignments? These are the questions that you should ask, because these examples are skill-specific descriptors that can define some of those general comments that we get, such as Anne is a sweet kid or Chris is a cute boy. Just remember, to ensure that we appropriately address behavior concerns in the IEP, we have to build a strong foundation in the PLAAF. IEP goals are developed from the information in the PLAAF needs narrative, findings, and the parent and student input sections. Informed decisions related to services and accommodations are made based on the present levels of performance. And when addressing behavior skills, we need to be sure that we provide objective information regarding the areas of concern. If a particular environment or activity seems to result in behavioral concerns, a description should also be included in the PLAAF that would provide context for those behaviors. Next slide. Please. Thank you, Lisa. So when we're identifying those behaviors in the PLAAF section of the IEP, we want to be sure to include information that's specific, clearly defined in detail, observable, an action that we can see, and measurable, an action that can be counted or timed. We should define behaviors in such a way that a person unfamiliar with the student can recognize the behavior, and we should include descriptive information on how that behavior impacts and impedes the student's learning. I see in the chat we have a question about what does PLAAF stand for again, and that is present levels of academic and functional performance. And I probably stumbled through that when I first came on. Sorry about that.
I also added it in the chat there too.
So. Thank you, Lisa. All right, let's look at the next slide, please. So oftentimes when we are looking at behavior descriptions in the PLAAF, we find that the information is too vague. So let's look at some examples here. Someone who's unfamiliar with a student may not be able to recognize a target behavior or skill in the IEP if we don't include vague specific descriptions. So take a look at these examples and notice the differences in the descriptions. On the left, we have vague behavior characteristics, and on the right, we have some specific behaviors that are measurable and that can be observed and counted. In the first example for disruptive, if I say that a student's disruptive, I need to ask, what does that look like? What is the student doing? Is the student shouting out? Is she having tantrums? Is she falling on the floor? Is she singing out the latest and greatest hits while the teacher's trying to teach? In this example, for this student, the specific description for the behavior indicates that that student's making comments out loud during lessons that aren't related to the topic. And then this interrupts the class and impedes the learning of the other students as well. So in the vague description, I wouldn't know what I was looking for if I was an observer that came into the classroom, just that the student's disruptive. But in the specific description, I know now that I would be looking for the student blurting out comments during the lesson that's not related to the topic. Look at the next vague descriptor, aggressive. This is pretty vague, and when I see a word like this, I start developing a picture in my mind of what aggressive might look like. In the example, where they give more specific details, we see that the student actually hits others during circle time when she doesn't get her way. Now, that's a pretty different picture than what I might have started out developing in my mind, but now that I have the details, I can see that the behavior that I want to measure is the occurrence of the student hitting others when she's in circle time. Hyperactive is another one that we see. And whenever I read an IEP that says a student's hyperactive, my mind kind of starts wandering about, okay, what does that mean? What is he doing? Specifically, what am I looking for? For this kiddo, in this example, he leaves the area without permission. Now, this is really important information to know if you're the teacher and he doesn't stay in his assigned area. You know, you don't want to be that teacher in the cafeteria trying to figure out where little Johnny ran off to. So we may have a runner here. So we want to make sure that we are looking at giving good descriptions. Even though this says he leaves the area, we want to know what that looks like. Unteachable. Now, this is really vague. This doesn't provide a specific description of any behavior. We don't know what the student is doing, what skill needs to be addressed. So when asked to explain this further, the teacher indicated that this student refuses to complete classwork. So now I can see what the student is doing. I know what the behavior is. He's not turning in his assignments. Now I can count that, I can see that, I can measure that. Let's take a look at a few more, and you guys help us decide by responding in the chat and let us know if the following examples are measurable and observable behaviors, or if the description is too vague. The first one we have is disrespectful to others. What do you think?
So we got one vague already. So
all right, and I see another vague. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I'm feeling this is kind of vague. How people define disrespectful can really vary. It varies across cultures. It varies across different teachers. So what specific behavior or behaviors are being identified as disrespectful? That's what we need to know when we're putting this information in the PLAAF. All right, let's try another one. Lisa, you want to move on?
Good job. Yeah.
Disrupts class. What do you think?
There come all those vagues again.
All right, we got some
Got
vagues.
A good group.
Got some more vagues.
We are actually, these are examples, you know, of behaviors that we see typically in a lot of IEPs. So we're glad to see all the vagues.
Yes, because what we really want to know is, what does this behavior actually look like? What are we counting when we are assessing for our baseline data for this disrupts class? Is this kid shouting out? Is this kid throwing books? Is this kid falling down on the floor? We don't know. So we have to be really specific about what behavior we want to address. All right, let's try another one. Here we have a kid that kicks others during circle time. All right, we had a hitter, now we got a kicker. What do you think? Is this a measurable behavior? Can I see it? Can I count it? Absolutely.
Yeah, very good. Definitely, if I wasn't the teacher, or if I was someone who was just going into a classroom to observe this behavior, I'd know exactly what I needed to look for. I could see it, I could count it, I could measure it. Awesome.
All right. Let's try another one. Shouts out answers instead of waiting to be called on by the teacher. Boy, that's a pet peeve that a lot of teachers have. Is it measurable? What do we think? Or is this too vague?
And we're getting lots of very specific, measurable,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Sure, we can count that. I could walk into a classroom and do a checklist and sit there and tally mark for the whole period. So I could certainly measure that. All right, how about the next one? One more. Inappropriately seeks attention.
This is an awesome group.
Right.
Yeah.
I see somebody says how, and that's exactly my question too. How? How is he inappropriately seeking attention? What is the student doing? We need to describe it and define it so that others can recognize it. All right. Man, you guys are awesome. You exactly know where we're headed with this, because we want to make sure that when we're writing these goals and we're addressing behaviors, that we are addressing behaviors that are measurable. Okay, so we're going to take a look now at just a little excerpt from a PLAAF. And this narrative is for Antonio, and Antonio has some limited interests, and he perseverates on topics that interest him. Trains, planes. He's often off task during classroom instruction, and he doesn't complete and or turn in his assignments on time. This impedes his ability to acquire new skills and maintain pace with his peers in the general education curriculum. And Antonio benefits from preferential seating close to the point of instruction for redirection and nonverbal prompting. This is just an example, and maybe not the best, but an example on how impeding behavior being off task results in the non-completion of his classroom assignments. This description kind of sets a foundation for potentially adding services in the IEP to address behavior. A goal for improving the completion of classroom assignments, including accommodations for preferential seating close to the point of instruction, might assist in addressing the students' off-task behaviors. Of course, these items and an inclusion of them in the IEP would be an IEP team decision on how this area would be addressed, but they certainly are setting a foundation for including some of this information and in those other sections of the IEP. All right. Now, we talked about the narrative section a little bit. Let's talk about the findings section. In the findings section, this is where we're going to refine exactly the skills that we're going to work on and develop goals for. So this needs to be addressed here. We're going to look at our target skill, make sure we've identified it clearly. We are going to include our measurement device that can be used frequently enough to monitor progress, and we're going to talk about that a little more later. And we're going to include that baseline data, or that starting point for the skills that we're going to address, and we're going to address these skills with services and goals. These are just a few examples maybe of some sources of information for the PLAAF, and this is not an exhaustive list. Discipline records and incident reports, FBA results, observations and data collection, interviews, rating scales, parent, student input, behavior checklists, and prior goal progress. This is just a couple examples of things that you might glean information from any or all of these for your narrative section and your findings section of the PLAAF. All right. So I said that baseline data that we used, that we got and collected for our findings section, those are the scores and skills that we're going to look at when we develop measurable annual goals. And measurable annual goals address skills to be taught that can be counted or observed. They're built from that baseline data in the findings section of the PLAAF, and they're based on building skills rather than achieving a certain letter grade or score, and rather than being based on advancing skill levels. So we want to be sure that we're utilizing the data. Utilizing data measures that are appropriate for that frequent progress monitoring and for assessing that progress on specific skills. And annual goals are also updated annually. So this is just a general overview or some key points for developing measurable annual goals. I want to go through now and talk about some questions to consider and some tips on writing goals for behavior specifically. So what are the conditions under which the skill will occur or be taught? That's something we want to consider. Has the skill been identified sufficiently enough that a parent or anyone who reads the goal will be able to identify and understand? And is the goal ambitious yet achievable during the life of the IEP? And does the method of measurement that we've chosen allow for that continued measurement of the skill and the monitoring of progress? Because we have to monitor progress for goals with the frequency that the IEP team will determine when they're developing the IEP. And that's minimally. So let's look at this tip. We want to be sure that when we're writing behavior goals, that we avoid writing goals that address not behaviors, like not hitting or not spitting. We want to employ that dead man or teddy bear test, because if a dead man or a teddy bear can do it, then it's not a skill that actually teaches a replacement behavior. For example, if we have a student who curses at others when he's angry or upset, and the behavior goal is for the student to not use profanity, then we have to ask ourselves, can a dead man or a teddy bear do that? Because the goal of not cursing doesn't teach the student how to respond when upset, right? And a dead man or a teddy bear cannot curse. So we want to teach this student to appropriately communicate his frustration without cursing. So an example for this particular scenario might be that we would develop a goal that states, when presented with a situation that makes the student angry, he will communicate his frustration by stating that he's upset without cursing, reducing the number of times he curses from an average, let's say, of 5 times per day, which was our baseline, to 0 times per day, as measured by a behavior checklist. Now we've taught a replacement behavior. Instruction is going to focus on appropriate ways of communicating his frustration. So in this example, he's going to respond that he's angry, and he's going to do that and state that without using profanity. I could use a behavior checklist or some kind of tool like that to collect my data and to monitor my progress on the student's performance on this particular goal. So here's another tip. Make sure that when you're writing your goals for students that they actually address student behavior and not adult behavior. So often we see goals and IEPs like the one here in the example for reduction of discipline referrals that, as written, really don't address the student behavior. By the end of the IEP, Michael will reduce the number of discipline referrals he receives per 9 weeks from a baseline of 6 per 9 weeks to 1 per 9 weeks as measured by school discipline data. What are we missing here? Discipline referrals are really subjective, right, to the adult or the adults who have written the referrals, and are dependent on adult responses to certain behaviors. This goal doesn't address a skill for Michael. We don't know what Michael needs to be working on, and we don't know how that would impact and decrease the number of discipline referrals that he receives. So if we haven't identified the behaviors, what are we going to teach him? In the development of the goal, the team needs to target a specific behavior to address that will result in some improved outcomes for Michael, that will result in fewer referrals that we are hoping to see. So here we need to know, what behaviors does Michael exhibit? And if the same behavior or different behaviors are resulting in referrals, because even in this particular situation, we said he has a baseline of 6 referrals per 9 weeks, but we don't know what he's being written up for. So this is a very vague description in this goal, and it really would not be helpful for this student until we address the target behaviors and know what skill he needs to learn. So these are some very important questions that need to be asked. What behavior is Michael exhibiting? What skills do we need to teach him?
And often, just adding to what you're saying, Diane, often, discipline referrals could be measuring one teacher's tolerance versus another teacher's tolerance. You know, one teacher tolerates way more than another who writes up the student for something others would not. So absolutely.
Absolutely, Lisa, because I may have more tolerance for one behavior than you have, and you may have more tolerance for a behavior that I have no tolerance for. So
Right.
it certainly is contingent on the adults, and we want to make sure that our goals are addressing student behaviors. All right, here's another tip. Include realistic expectations. In this example, by the end of the IEP, Renee will increase her time on task in the second grade classroom from 20% of the instructional day to 100% of the instructional day as measured by a behavior checklist. Does this appear to be a realistic expectation? What do you think? Let us know in the chat.
And somebody had put in the chat regarding the previous example we gave that even as substitutes, you know, teachers' misunderstanding of the student.
Absolutely. And I see we have another comment. Generally, increasing the desired behavior instead of decreasing an undesired behavior lets the student know what to do and tells the student the replacement behavior. Yes. Oh, I love this. I have a hard time expecting anyone to get exactly 100% of the time. I hope nobody's checking behind me to see if I'm engaged 100% of the time. And when you look at a second grader, what second grader is expected to be engaged 100% of the time during the instructional day? Do we think this is realistic?
And someone also said
No.
takes too much time to measure,
Right.
you know, and I look at this and say, is somebody going to sit in the classroom and watch him 100% of the day to see, you know, if he's on time? It's almost impossible to measure.
Yeah. How would you do that? My question was, I'm really curious about what instrument they were using to measure that. What evidence do they have for being on task? Maybe the team wants to refine this. I would say refining this to focus on a specific activity or a specific time of the day or the completion of a specific job task, then we might be able to write a goal that would address some of that increasing time on task behavior. But as written, this is really unrealistic for anybody, and especially a second grader. All right, here's another tip. Make sure you're teaching a replacement behavior. A replacement behavior is an appropriate skill that is maintained by the same consequences as a challenging behavior. For example, instead of shouting out in class to gain the teacher's attention, the skill could be taught in the goal that would focus on the student raising his hand to gain the attention of the teacher. In this example, the outcome's the same. The student is still going to get the teacher's attention, but the inappropriate shouting out has been replaced by raising his hand. We've also seen teachers utilize I need help cards for this type of behavior or nonverbal signals to the teacher as replacement behaviors for shouting out. So the goal could be written in different ways other than just raising his hand. The goal could be to use a card to gain attention or to use nonverbal cues or signals to the teacher to gain attention. But the point being that I think this team wants to reduce the behavior of shouting out because of the interruptions that it's causing in the classroom.
Right. And just to, you know, early on in my career, I had a teacher who was actually working on, you know, a shouting out behavior for a student in their class, and, you know, very nicely worked on some positive behavior interventions and supports. And, you know, for the whole class, anytime anyone raised their hand, they got a goldfish cracker. She'd walk around with her handing out her goldfish crackers. But, you know, it didn't take long for that student, you know, to start raising his hand, and you know, no, he wasn't singled out. Everybody who did it raised their hand, got a goldfish cracker. I used to think that was a great I
can be motivated by goldfish crackers for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, sample goal format. So this is a sample goal format that we shared from our office for many years, and I'm not sure exactly where it came from, so I don't know who to give credit to for it, but it really includes all components that we would desire in a measurable annual goal. The first one is the time frame, and we know that IEPs are written annually, so the time frame can be assumed, but many teachers will include the phrases like by the end of the IEP or by a given date, such as the last day of the IEP, as their time frame, and that's fine. The next component is the condition. And this would be the materials or the instruction provided, or maybe the environment in which the goal is being addressed. For behavior, we might have examples such as when playing on the playground or when eating lunch in the cafeteria as conditions. The next part of the goal would be to identify that target behavior or skill that's going to be addressed. And then we have level of proficiency. In this format example, the baseline data is included in that proficiency component. Including the baseline data in the goal is not required, but in our Enrich IEP format, when you write your goals, those goals transfer directly onto the progress report. And so they're printed on the progress report. And by including that baseline data in your goal, that information is now included on the progress report in the goal. So that rate of improvement is evident when reporting progress on the goal. So the team and the parents don't have to refer to any other documents to determine what level of performance the student started at on the skill and the goal. Just remember that that baseline data is required in the findings, doesn't have to be in the goal, but it's nice to be there. So you can say from your baseline to whatever level of proficiency that you're working towards. And then the last component is that measurement device or tool. Remember, we're going to use this device to monitor skill progress. This is that same tool that we listed in the findings section to establish our baseline data. And while we're talking about goal progress, we just wanted to touch slightly on monitoring progress. So Lisa, if you go to the next slide.
Sure. There we go.
As I said earlier, when we develop goals, the team decides how frequently progress is going to be reported to parents. We oftentimes see every 4.5 weeks or 9 weeks. So the measurement device that we choose when we are writing goals and collecting our baseline data has to be able to be given at least frequently enough to report progress to parents. This device helps to inform instruction and determine if interventions are working. Through progress and through progress reporting, we let the parents know how the student is performing on their skills. Generic statements such as, Sarah's doing a great job, or way to go, Johnny, you're getting there, really aren't sufficient, and they don't provide goal progress data information. And that's what we want to see in a progress report. We want to know how much progress has been Sarah made since we recorded that baseline. How close is she achieving her goal? This is the information that we want included on our progress report. So we got to be sure that we have a tool that we can use frequently enough to continue monitoring progress. And even though we're reporting to parents maybe every 4.5 or 9 weeks, realistically as teachers, we are probably collecting that data even more frequently. So when we say that, that's why we say you can't use a tool like MAP or standardized test or something that you would give annually, because you have to be able to progress monitor as you move along to see how the students are performing and if our interventions are working. And if they're not, then we need to address that as well.
And let's take a look at accommodations. So the IEP should consider any accommodations that may be necessary for the student to access the general curriculum and or appropriate activities to make effective progress. There should be a connection between the PLAAF narrative and any accommodations selected for the student. And if we remember Antonio from a previous example, he was benefiting from preferential seating near the point of instruction. If you look at this slide, I love this saying, fair, and you probably all heard it, but we like to say it again. Fair isn't everybody getting the same thing. Fair is everybody getting what they need in order to be successful. And in this picture, you can see for all 3 of these little boys here, you know, that the goal is that they have access to the baseball game. You know, if they all get the same thing, one crate to stand on, they don't all have access to the game. However, if they get what they need, then everyone has access to that game. And I love that picture. It seems to be circulating these days, but you know, accommodations have to be in your PLAAF. You have to explain why this student needs accommodations, and that these accommodations aren't going to be blanket accommodations for everybody, where we see in some schools where every student in high school has extended time. for testing. You know, is that appropriate if you're talking about a student who has trouble focusing and paying attention? Would chunking tests into smaller parts be more appropriate? Would taking a test at a time that the student is able to focus easier, would that be more appropriate? So trying to stay away from those general, you know, one size fits all accommodations. And, you know, you learn early on, I'm sure as teachers, you've learned, and as a school psych, of course, I learned early on with the accommodation when we were talking earlier about preferential seating. And I had a teacher who had a runner. And so we put the accommodation in there that he was not going to sit by the door. He was sitting in the back of the room. And we did put him in the back of the room by a window, and he crawled out the window just as easily as he went out the door, you know, and we really thought we were doing a good thing, solving that issue. But, you know, really taking time to consider, you know, the accommodations and how they're working for students. And next time. So here are just a few examples of common accommodations: extended time for assignments, peer buddy, preferential seating, notes from peers, small group setting for quizzes and exams, multiple or frequent breaks, recorded books. Just make sure that you include a clear explanation of the accommodations. How much extended time? Where is the preferential seating going to be? What is the role of the peer buddy? What does frequent break look like? Because when we say frequent breaks, oftentimes, you know, teachers said, I sent him out in the hallway for a break and he hasn't returned for, you know, 20 minutes. You know, defining a frequent break to the water fountain and back, and, you know, or a frequent break to walk in the hallway for, you know, 2 minutes, but to be more descriptive in the examples that you give. There needs to be sufficient descriptions of the accommodations and how they should be implemented, especially so that your general education teachers have a clear understanding of how to implement them in the classroom. Because as we all know, these accommodations are not for the special education classroom. These are for the general education setting, and the accommodations for students to be able to access that general curriculum. So those gen ed teachers really need to be the ones that understand the accommodations, because they're the ones typically that are going to be implementing them. And remember, just a reminder that gen ed teachers need a copy of student accommodations prior to the first day of instruction or implementation of a new or amended IEP. And then here's an example of addressing behavior concerns through accommodations. This is an example that was taken from the needs section of the PLAAF. So Mike becomes anxious when he doesn't understand instructions for assignments or he finds a task difficult or challenging. When he becomes anxious, he demonstrates behaviors such as repeatedly clearing his throat, tapping himself on the head, and refusing to attempt assignments. So what are some accommodations that might be helpful for Mike when faced with challenging tasks or when he feels himself becoming anxious? You can go ahead and put some in the chat if you've got some ideas. If this was a PLAAF, what are some accommodations that you might think would be appropriate for Mike? And everybody's getting tired. It's getting toward the end of the day.
And Lisa, I was thinking for this student, if he starts to recognize the anxiety increasing, he might need to have that accommodation of being able to signal that he needs a break. And I see somebody's putting in the chat now, allowing him to have a short break may help him to reduce the anxiety. Exactly. Access to walking, stretching breaks, squeezing a stress ball, a weighted blanket. Awesome.
Absolutely. Great job. Thank you guys so much. And go ahead, Diane.
And on those assignments that are really difficult to them, if we recognize those, if we can maybe chunk those, assignments for him, check for understanding of directions for assignments. Some of those accommodations really help to reduce some of those anxieties and stressors that some of our kids are having.
Right. And sometimes behaviors don't always result in a goal, but may be addressed just through accommodations. So just a tip, because somehow today, Diane, I think we're enjoying giving out tips or something, because I'm thinking this is the third time we've said a good tip.
Yeah.
But after you have written your accommodations, go back and look in the PLAAF and see if you can find the justification for those accommodations. You know, was the need communicated clearly? There we go. And then services. If a student has a behavior goal, then services for behavior should be included in the IEP and provided in the least restrictive environment. The team identifies the special education services needed, as well as the time and frequency of those special education services. The team also identifies any related services that might be required, such as a behavior specialist, an ABA therapist, and psych services, counseling services. Supplemental services are also considered, such as training with parents, training with teachers, administrators, as well as professional training for paraprofessionals, or whomever might be providing that additional educational assistance throughout the day. Okay, so let's talk about implementation.
All right, so far today we've covered special factors, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, goals, accommodations, and services. LRE decisions and assessment participation and extended school year participation are also areas that the IEP team will be addressing at the IEP meeting. These decisions are really related to assessment, like assessment participation and ESY participation on really student-specific details in the different sections of the IEP, like present levels. For our assessment participation, we're looking at, based on the student's age and grade, and alternative instruction and access to the general curriculum and participation in the general curriculum, as well as accommodations. And for ESY participation, decisions are based on whether the team anticipates that the student would have a significant regression if extended school year services aren't provided, or if the nature and severity of the student's disability might impact the student's maintenance of attained skills, or if the student is perhaps at a critical point of instruction and has some emerging skills, or maybe they're at a transition point such that if they don't have continued instruction, that they might lose that information without a break. They might, if with a break, and it's crucial that they continue to have some educational and instructional services. And they might ask, are there any special circumstances? Maybe the students had a large number of absences during the school year that would be relevant to extended school year. But with the limited time that we have, we didn't go into these details because we don't have that much information on a particular student to justify showing examples for that specific IEP content information. But those are certainly decisions that the IEP team would be making when they're analyzing all the information that they have on the student. So following IEP development, though, the parent and guardian is going to be provided with a prior written notice, and this notice would explain the actions that were proposed in the IEP and why those actions were proposed or refused, even in actions that were refused, and actions that were considered and refused would be delineated in another section. All the information sources used in making the IEP decisions would be listed, and any other relevant information in making the decisions that the team made in the IEP. This prior written notice, or sometimes we refer to it as PWN, would be provided prior to the implementation of the IEP. Once the IEP has been implemented, though, progress towards goals should be monitored. Communication lines between the teachers and the parents should remain open, and documentation of the provision of accommodations and the effectiveness of those accommodations should be discussed. This information is crucial in making decisions for future accommodations and recommendations by the IEP team. Lisa and I were talking about this earlier, and a lot of times with our older students, we hear comments from them about how they aren't interested in having small group testing for an accommodation because they don't want to be removed from the classroom. So ensuring that the team and the parents are talking about this. Is this a valuable accommodation? Is it effective? Is it working for the student? Is it necessary? If it's effective and working, we want to keep it in and we want to talk to the student about why it's working, but making sure that we have open lines of communication about all of those pieces of the IEP. If in the progress monitoring process, the team identifies or the teacher identifies that, hey, this student's not making progress, then the team should reconvene to determine if there are some adjustments that need to be made, or if maybe there needs to be some adjustments to the interventions that we selected to work with this student. Maybe we need to change them or intensify them, which any of these decisions might lead to changes or amendments to the IEP. So in all of our instruction, both academic and behavioral, we want to ensure that we are utilizing evidence-based and high leverage practices. So let's just take a quick look at some high leverage practices. One of the talking points for high leverage practices is that effective special education teachers recognize that academic and behavioral support strategies are more effective when delivered within the context of positive and caring teacher-student relationships. The high leverage practices that you see on the slide are from the Council of Exceptional Children and the Cedar Center. And Lisa's going to provide you with a link in the text box. Also, we're going to include this as a link, I think, on one of our resource slides. But this is some really good content information, and this link will take you directly to high leverage practices. Today, we're highlighting 7, 8, 9, and 10 because these practices promote positive and caring relationships and social, emotional, and behavioral learning. But if you look at high leverage practice number 7, establish a consistent, organized, and respectful learning environment. And 8 is to provide positive and constructive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior. 9 is teach social behaviors. And 10 is to conduct functional behavioral assessments to develop individual student behavior support plans. When we talk about IEP implementation, if we have the practices in place with high leverage practices 7, 8, and 9, all of those things help to contribute to good implementation of good, well-developed IEPs. And we want to make sure that we as professionals are looking at those practices and ensuring that we are using those practices to help guide us. Another link that Lisa's going to provide in the chat is for some FBA and BIP modules. That high leverage practice number 10, we've done some training in our office, and we also refer to the Kansas Technical Assistance System Network modules for FBA and BIP processes. This would take much longer than the hour that we have today to go through, but these are some really good resources for those evidence-based practices. Lisa's also going to share in the text box another resource link from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. And this link shares evidence-based strategies and practices for reducing behaviors in the classroom, identifying behavior supports, and for behavioral interventions.
They should be in there.
Okay, I see the one for the high leverage practices.
Yeah.
All right. And I wish we had more time today. It looks like we are at the 2-minute mark.
Yeah.
But I want to wrap this up by taking us back to our original statement at the beginning and reference that keep them so we can teach them motto, because if we are adequately addressing behavior concerns, it is really our hope as teachers and professionals that we will be keeping more students in school, more students engaged in learning, and students exiting from our schools college and career ready. I know this was really a fast, quick, broad overview for addressing behavior in the IEP, but we really hope that it's been helpful.
Any questions? I think that's our next slide. But any questions that anybody has that we can answer? I know it was a quick overview, and if you want to get more in detail, the Kansas Assistance Network will go through 7 modules for developing functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans, it has to be right now like the best training that's out there that you can do, and they're very doable. You don't have to sit down and do all of them. You can do part and come back to them. And then NCII, their website just has, you know, so much information, from, you know, interventions that you can be doing in your classroom to writing behavior IEPs, and I see, yeah, the tasks and modules are great.
Yes.
They really are. And there's 2 modules that, you know, administrators and other people that may sit on an IEP team, when you're going through the functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan process. So that kind of, you know, are great training modules for those kinds of folks as well.
So
any other questions?
at a certain point, I believe we started this saying it was going to be a wow presentation. And Lisa, Dianne, thank you both. It was phenomenal. Thank you to our participants today. Y'all were fantastic with your feedback. I cannot wait to be able to share this resource broadly. For those of you that are with us today on the Zoom or with us on Facebook Live, you'll be able to access this particular presentation so that you can reference back to it on our website at www.schoolbehavioralhealth.org/BASK. If you would like to access any of our additional learn and share content, you can certainly access that on there, such as Basking in the Spotlight, Working Through It Wednesday. And we make sure that that is accessible and shareable for you all. So please take a gander at that. Join us on our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook at BBA of SC. That's BBASK. We would love to see y'all there. Would love to hear your feedback. Next month, I just wanted to share with y'all, as we're going into the new year, BASK has been diligent in making sure that we are excited and geared up for what is to come. And we will be starting the new year off with a focus on bullying prevention and intervention. We will be highlighting for our national webinar, Dr. Robert Stevens, who will be talking about bullying prevention. We have representatives from OSES, June Jenkins, as well as Jan Urbanski, that are going to be doing a 2-part Working Through It Wednesday series for us. And we have lovely individuals from our community, Ashley Wilkerson, who's a community leader and advocate, as well as Marjorie Raylander, who's a school psychologist, who will be basking in the spotlight next month. So we hope that y'all join us for that content. We appreciate you spending the few days before big holiday season with us. And thank you to the Office of Special Education Services for sharing Lisa and Dianne with us today. Y'all were absolutely fabulous, and we cannot thank you enough. And with that, I believe that we will have everyone exit stage left for the evening and hopefully engage in some lovely holiday self-care. So thank you so much, everyone. And again, thank you, Dianne and Lisa, and we look forward to seeing y'all again very soon.
Thank you.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.